Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, and welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paula DuPont, and we're talking about business news and what that means to you. And today, I'm calling this show the Good News Friday Show. I want to talk today about some of the headlines that may have gotten lost with all of the negative ones that we've been hearing. And, you know, that news is out there. You know where to find it. It finds you. But today we're going to talk about how the stock market ended this week, which was good. Spoiler alert. Some other positive things from the market and from businesses in general. We're going to talk about the paycheck support out there, the different things that are going on right now to help people recover some of the money that they may otherwise not have because of unemployment. And we're also going to talk about the fact that carbon emissions are down, gas prices are down, and finally, some great resources that are available to us for free. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. So let's start with the fact that the stock market rallied this week for the second week in a row, with the Dow Industrials getting their first back-to-back week gains since February. U.S. stocks had rallied on Friday, putting major indexes on track for a second consecutive week of gains. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 705 points this week, about 3%, represents about 3%. The S&P 500 added 2.7%, and the NASDAQ Composite added 1.4%. Last week, the S&P 500 had its biggest one-week percentage gain since 1974. At the same time, the NASDAQ recorded its biggest one-week percentage gain since 2009. While it is good news, and of course that's what we're striving for today, all three indexes are still down more than 12% from their mid-February highs. But they have pretty much cut the losses in half since late March. So that's encouraging. It's thought that the market is reacting strongly to some of the news that was announced with the president saying that plans were in place to look at the reopening of the economy in a phased approach that would have governors decide when they would start lifting some of the bans in their states and also determine what businesses would open, when people would go back to work. It's thought that there may be as many as 29 states that could soon begin the process of opening. But again, that was part of the president's news conference the other day, and he highlighted some of the things that would be looked at for doing that, for reopening the economy. The market's also likely impacted by speculation about some possible coronavirus treatments. There are some companies with experimental drugs that are getting close to being approved to be used more widespread. And so, of course, the market's keeping a close eye on that and on pharmaceuticals in general, not only for a vaccine, for a treatment, but then also looking at testing, which wouldn't necessarily be pharmaceuticals, but at the same time, there are many players in the game that are developing these very important tools that we need to fight this pandemic. So it sounds like we're getting closer, and there have been news reports on the different drugs and how they're doing and what the likelihood is of them getting approved. This being mid-April, it's the time of year when you have the report of first quarter earnings for corporations. And some of those major companies have already had their calls. JP Morgan Chase, Johnson & Johnson, and several others. It's expected that next week there will be a number of other big companies coming out with their earnings, their quarterly earnings, companies such as Coca-Cola, Netflix, Delta. So those may influence, again, how the market will do going forward. The fact that the market ended in a rally is kind of surprising, too, that it wasn't affected more by the recent reports that came out about retail sales for the previous month or so. There was a report that came out that said that retail sales plunged a record 8.7%, and that industrial output also fell steeply in that period of time. Although the overall retail average for sales has decreased, some companies have actually done okay. Walmart, for instance, and their 4,700 stores has seen a 20% increase in sales for March. And of course, that's mostly because they are able to be open for essential supplies that people need, a brick and mortar place for people to go to. The company has also hired more than 100,000 people to help staff its stores. So there's some positive news there. At the same time, Target also reported an increase in sales. They look at the period of time from year to year, and through the end of March, they saw that their sales climbed more than 20%. So that seems to be, pretty encouraging news. And finally, just transitioning, I guess, from talking about the stock market, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, to use a cliche. But with the coronavirus and the updates that continue to come in, it's, the news is not good, and there's no way to sugarcoat it, nor is it fair to do that. It's a very tragic situation. And each number that's added to the toll, the death toll, the number of cases is tragic. And we're still processing all this and still right in the middle of it. But just, I guess, to provide a little bit of perspective, there's worldwide, there are about 2.21 million cases of the virus. In the United States, there's 684,000 cases of coronavirus, and there have been 34,000 deaths from coronavirus. I guess if there's any good news in that, and that is what I'm trying to highlight today, it's the fact that more people are surviving it than succumbing to it. And there's probably a whole lot more people out there who have it, and we don't know because we don't have widespread testing. But right now, let's just try to focus on the fact that while it's still the monster out there haunting us and prowling, trying to get us, that our chances of survival are greater than our chances of not. So that's the last dour message I hope to deliver today. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Payroll Protection Program and what that means to you. See you in a minute.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Hi, I'm back. So in this segment, I'm going to talk about the help that's been available for people to help with either money loss through not working right now or just to help get through at this time because not everyone getting stimulus money is necessarily out of work. However, the way the program was designed or the stimulus package was designed was a heavy emphasis on the payroll protection program, the 3 Ps, not to be confused with personal protection equipment. I'm trying to keep these acronyms straight, these corona acronyms. But either way, in both cases, they're both really good things. And I'll start talking about the stimulus package that was approved a few weeks ago. The payroll protection program was part of this package, and it allocated $350 billion to help the Small Business Administration provide loans to small businesses in order to keep their employees paid, to keep them from being furloughed, laid off, providing them some assistance with that. Now, naturally, anytime you offer a program like this, as far-reaching as it is, and despite the fact that it is $350 billion, there are those who are frustrated by the fact that it can't cover everybody or not everybody's been able to take advantage of it. And in fact, in the 2 weeks since that had been set aside and people could start to apply for these loans, over 1.4 million loans were given through the Small Business Administration. Right now, they have suspended offering new loans because they basically have reached the max of that part of the package. There are some efforts underway in Congress with both parties looking at how they can add more money to help small businesses. So there is a keen awareness among both parties on all levels of politics that help is needed for small businesses to stay afloat. The difficulty, of course, is, some businesses, despite being able to have some help to keep people on the payroll, they may not survive without sales and if they have to still continue paying for rent and supplies and other things. So it's not a surefire solution, but I think it's good news. I think it's pretty good news that we have that available. And the nice part about it is, too, that businesses won't have to pay it back if they keep their employees on the payroll. So as long as people are getting paid, they won't have to pay it back. In terms of what, there are, of course, rules around who gets the loans. The loans are based on a company's payroll costs, and they offer, as I said before, they offer forgiveness if the companies retain their workers or they rehire them after they've been laid off. As I said, both parties do want to see more help, and they're looking to try to add $250 billion to this program. The problem is right now there's differences in how they want to go about it and what the terms are for these grants. A couple other quick things about the SBA loans before we move on, and that is that the number of approved loans is more than 30 times what the SBA processes in a year. So basically in 2 weeks' time is 30 times more applications than they deal with in a year. So that gives a sense of just how many businesses out there are hurting and need that support. The other thing I'll just mention is that there is a $100,000 limit on the amount of employees' compensation that can be considered when the loan forgiveness is calculated. So there is a cap. One other last thing, I promise, is that these loans have been available to not just, hair salons or the small mom and pop shops, but also even companies like hedge fund companies and law firms and pretty much any type of small business that you can imagine. So there will probably be more about this in the weeks ahead or months ahead, maybe, with what Congress is looking at. So while this stimulus money in the form of the Payroll Protection Program is aimed at making sure people have money, have income during this period of time where they may not be able to go in and do their work as usual. At the same time, it's hard to ignore the fact the very disturbing numbers that have come out, the latest numbers with unemployment. This week, with there being now about 22 million people estimated to be out of work and who have applied for unemployment because of the coronavirus and their work being affected. So perhaps some of these people who have had to apply for unemployment will be hired back by their companies if they work for a small business who was able to get a loan. But in the meantime, they are getting unemployment, and they're getting it beyond the terms of what each state offers. So where many states will offer about half salary for unemployment compensation, the federal government is adding $600 a week to that to help make up the difference. Also, they have extended the period of time. I believe it's an additional 16 weeks for those getting unemployment to be able to collect on that benefit. So that's at least positive that we have that in place. I know it's small consolation to people who don't know their futures and if they will land another job or if they'll be able to return to their jobs. But at least it's something. And that, in addition to the stimulus checks that went out this week to each individual, adds $1,200 to each person's bank account, those that are eligible for that payment. And as I said, 80 million payments were made to those who had that information on file with the IRS, their direct deposit information. For those who do not have that information on file with the IRS, paper checks are going to be sent. However, I don't think they're going out for another couple of weeks. And from what I understand, this could take several weeks before you would get a paper check in the mail. So we're going to break for another commercial or two. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some other positive things happening in the business world. So please stay tuned.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Hi, I'm back. And as I said before, there's so many negative headlines, but there are those positive stories that you see highlighting some newscasts that we hear about. A lot of them having to do with outreach to help the healthcare community, those on the front line. And, we're seeing that kind of outreach from individuals and communities as well as businesses. But in terms of businesses doing business, we have seen where some companies have had to just sit quiet and basically go on hold, and you have others who are trying to do business as usual. It's particularly difficult for retail stores who, it's difficult for a lot of different businesses, but retail, unless you're doing essential products, you can't be open. Restaurants, entertainment, and of course manufacturing. Many production plants have had to shut down during this time frame. But you hear a lot of good stories about companies sort of reinventing themselves or reshifting how they work, especially those production lines, to be able to produce products and things that are very critical right now during the crisis. General Motors, for example, we've heard the stories about how they have reopened one of their production plants, their auto production plants, and have partnered with Ventec, a company that makes ventilators. And this way they're able to mass produce them to be able to have a much bigger output to hopefully meet the demand. So that's one of them. Another company that's doing something differently is Abbott Laboratories. Now, they, of course, their field is to develop healthcare products. But since the start of this pandemic, they have been focused on coming up with a testing product, something that would deliver fast results. And they actually have something that right now can deliver results in under 15 minutes. So that's something that I don't believe is widely available yet, but it's moving very quickly, as are some other drugs and treatments in progress right now in development. They're moving very quickly. The FDA and the National Institutes for Health have been fast-tracking some of these while still obviously upholding high standards for safety. But people are doing things differently, whether it's the federal government and these federal agencies knowing that they need to step up to the challenge and do what they need to do to help move some of these very critically needed devices and tests and vaccines to get them out. Another area that we're seeing some differences is in people using or companies using their 3D printing. 3D printers, of course, that's a whole other innovation that's been around now for some time, but where if you have the right design, you can create almost anything with a 3D printer. As I said, when I first saw a story about a 3D printer many years ago, it was on the cover of a magazine where they had a Stradivarius violin, one of the preeminent types of musical instruments. And 3D printers now are developing face shields, or at least the apparatus that holds the plastic shield in place. And so they are actually, there's been efforts at different universities and innovation labs to develop as many of them as possible and even share the design for them so that others can use their own 3D printers to create these face shields. Ford Motor Company is one of the companies that's taken advantage of using the design that was made available, in this case by Granger Engineering Design Innovation Lab. And they use that technology in order to set up one of their factories to make the face shield. And it seems like it's just every day that I'll see another story about another distillery that has converted its process to make hand sanitizer, to use the alcohol that they have on hand and to reconfigure their stills to be able to produce it. One company that I was first aware of is Boardroom Distillery, and that's the name of the product. And they provide their hand sanitizer free of charge to anyone who comes in with a container to put it in. So you just have to bring in your own bottle, and then they will fill it for you for free. But there's dozens of them across the country that are doing that. And in fact, just recently, somebody who's not a distillery, but True Value, that makes paint, and they also do make hand sanitizer, but they may be more known for the paint that they make. And when they found that initially their stores were flooded with customers buying up the hand sanitizers that they had on the shelf, they realized before they had a chance to prepare that the stores themselves were left with none for their own purposes. So True Value reconfigured its operation to make paint, to turn that into one to make hand sanitizers, to then make that available to their stores and the employees there. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. Another feel-good story that I see often is the story of either an individual or a company not known for this, but turning their attention to making face masks. And I've seen companies where they are often in the textile industry in some way, shape, or form, whether it's making plastics or making professional athletic uniforms, or camping equipment, where they are now using those resources and the people who work there to mass-produce face masks. A lot of times donating them to a local hospital or sending them to New York where they're direly needed. But you see that almost every day. And then, of course, there's many individuals who are supporting that effort as well from their homes, people who either do that professionally or as a hobby, to sew, and they're making them. So a lot of positive stories of business people and individuals, business companies and individuals doing their part to support the healthcare workers. And, of course, we're very grateful for that. So we're going to pause for another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the fact that one of the effects of this virus is an overall reduction in carbon emissions. So more on that when we come back.
Hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hi, we're back. And as I said before, we're going to talk about carbon emissions and the fact that they're down. There has been some news coverage lately talking about that, and in fact suggesting other environmental outcomes because of the coronavirus and people sheltering in place and factories being closed and offices being closed. And that all, of course, having an impact on how much energy is used, and energy that may come from fossil fuel sources, which are among the chief emitters of carbon dioxide. But there was an article recently in National Geographic, and it talked about the fact that in China, carbon emissions were down an estimated 18% between early February and mid-March due to falls in coal consumption and industrial output. The slowdown caused the world's largest emitter to avoid some 250 million metric tons of carbon pollution, more than half the annual carbon emissions of the United Kingdom. So in that period of time that China had shut down and factories had closed down, they had seen this significant impact, which of course will have a bearing in the end of the year totals. And in fact, these effects could be seen for a while. And although China is the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, we can expect that we will see some similar trends in the United States and in Europe. In Europe right now, declining power demands and depressed manufacturing could cause emissions to fall by nearly 400 million metric tons this year. And that represents about 9% of the European Union's cumulative 2020 emissions target. So while we don't have that data yet for the United States because we're still in it, we can expect that we'll probably see something similar here in this country. Of course, all eyes are on China right now because they're ahead of the rest of us in recovering from the coronavirus. So we've been looking at them for how they are bringing their businesses back, how they're reopening their economy there, and what steps that they're taking to do that and assure safety. I know that American businesses are looking at that closely in some of the practices that they've put into place. But carbon emissions is really it is a byproduct of the manufacturing and fossil fuel production or consumption. One study said that the effects of the coronavirus on carbon emissions first surfaced right after January, or around the end of January. According to this analysis, emissions plunged some 25% in the first 4 weeks following Chinese New Year in late January. And that's as coal consumption and industrial activities like oil refining failed to rebound after the yearly holiday slowdown. And that was the first indication that we could see an impact to carbon emissions. Behind China, the U.S. is the second biggest carbon dioxide producer, and the United Kingdom is the third. And now both of these countries are in steep economic turmoil because of the coronavirus, and we are seeing a reduction in the amount of power consumed and transit-related emissions. In Italy, which primarily uses natural gas to generate electricity, power demands declined steadily after the country went into lockdown in early March. By the end of the month, demand was down 27% compared with the same period in 2019. National Geographic said that across the European Union, power demands could fall 6.2% by the end of the year, compared with a pandemic-free world. In terms of power demand in the United States, it's still too early to tell overall what it's going to look like in the end from this virus. But March 31st analysis had said that power demand was collapsing in the nation's industrial and commercial sectors. And that is not surprising given that the bulk of power use is from business and manufacturing. Individuals, even though there's more people at home right now and they're using more devices, TVs and laptops and internet connections and all the different things that we're using more of and more family members are using more of, in the end, it's still probably not nearly enough to make up for the lack of power that's being used by industrials. So it will be interesting to see what happens with that when we look at our numbers. Another source of carbon dioxide emissions is, of course, traffic and cars. And in the U.S., traffic on the road is down 38%. And that's actually something we'll talk a little bit more about that impact in another segment, what that means in terms of other industries. But that the fact that there are fewer cars on the road and the fact that cars generally are designed to be more efficient when there's less congestion means that an overall reduction in emissions right now. So, as I said, that's a good news story, and it's, it would be nice if we could hold on to that beyond this pandemic. It perhaps might make people more aware, at least. Related to this, though, I talked about power use, power consumption. And for the individuals at home who don't have anything else to do but stay home, some people of those staying home may be unemployed right now or struggling in some ways, and the power bill got put on the back burner. A lot of the utilities in this country, both electric utilities and water utilities, gas utilities, have taken a more compassionate approach in terms of power disruptions or disconnections. In some states or some cities, it's an order that came from the government, the local government, to suspend any disconnections. In other places, major corporations are saying that they will not disconnect customers during this time due to lack of payment. So, again, I mean, it's kind of a good news, bad news kind of a thing. It's bad news that you're not able to pay your bill and that you'd be in that position. But it's good news, at least, that there's some flexibility with that. And overall, companies are trying to do what they can to try to keep people still with power, very critical for them, especially in keeping connected with the rest of the world virtually. And it does relieve some anxiety in a very anxious time for many of us. So we're coming to another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to touch on something we just mentioned in this last segment about fewer cars on the road and what that means. And in this segment coming up, we're going to talk about the positive shortfall of that. See you in a minute.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Okay, we're back. And in this segment, we're going to talk about the fact that since many of us are not able to go anywhere and we're pretty much sheltered at home except for having to go out to get essential items, that there are a couple other things that are resulting from that. There's less traffic on the road. We're not out in our cars. And because of that, we're not buying gasoline. And so the effect of that, of course, may not be so great on the oil companies that refine the gas. But for us, given that hopefully we'll still realize this benefit when we are able to drive, gas prices are lower. Oil and gas prices in the United States are continuing to tumble. It's been a trend since the beginning of this, falling to under $1.50 a gallon for a tank of regular unleaded gasoline. And there was a report recently by the AAA that the national average for a tank of unleaded gas and diesel fuel is $1.82 per gallon, and that's down from last year's average of $2.83 per gallon for both unleaded gas and diesel fuel. The lowest prices in the country are in the Midwest, with Wisconsin having the lowest overall price of $1.25 per gallon, followed by Oklahoma, Ohio, and Kentucky. In some states, the price of gasoline had begun to drop significantly in January, with some states reporting gas selling for $1.50 per gallon. So while this has had a tremendous negative impact for oil companies and crude oil, it is, of course, some of the lowest prices that we've seen in this country for gas. If only we could use it, right? I mean, a lot of us were sheltered in place and don't have much reason to go anywhere, but hopefully this will carry over for a while. So there's other good news that comes with that as well. First of all, just recognizing the fact that we're not out there driving and having to deal with congestion and rush hour and a lot of those things that were so stressful. We can be grateful that we don't have to deal with that right now. There will come a time, of course, when we will, and, we'll deal with that then. But for right now, we don't have the stress of driving in congested traffic. And as a result of not being out there driving, there are fewer accidents. And that means that all those premiums that we pay year after year for our car insurance, here's an opportunity for us to maybe reap a little bit of a reward for that, for not contributing to accidents happening and claims. And as a result, the insurance companies, most of the major insurance companies, are offering some kind of refund to their customers in recognition of this. So I have actually a list of all of the companies that are doing something. So I'll just touch on some of this just to give you an idea. Allstate is offering more than $600 million in April and May to its customers. And what that looks like is 15% money back based on their monthly premium during those 2 months, April and May. Esurance, similar 15% cash refund for April and May. Farmers, 25% reduction, and that's going to be applied automatically as a credit on the next billing statement. So if you recently paid for your account in full, they will issue you a refund for the amount of the reduction. Geico is giving a 15% credit to its auto and motorcycle policy holders. Liberty Mutual is going to give back around $250 million to its customers, and that looks like 15% refund on 2 months of their auto premium. Mercury Insurance also 15% back to customers in April and May. Nationwide is also doing a one-time premium refund of $50 per policy for personal auto policies as active as of March 31st. Progressive is going to give a credit for 20% of premium, the April premium. State Farm is doing a $2 billion dividend to its auto insurance customers. And USAA is returning $520 million to members. Every member with an auto insurance policy in effect as of March 31st will receive a 20% credit on 2 months of premiums in the coming weeks. So hopefully this isn't a total surprise to you that you've already heard from your insurance companies about what they're doing. But it's nice to know that all those premiums that you've been paying all this time, and hopefully without an accident, that you're actually going to get a little credit for once. So something else to look forward to coming up. So just to recap the good news in all this, the good news that comes from the fact that you're not out there driving your car. One is you're doing your part in not contributing more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Second, you're not dealing with the stress and anxiety that comes with rush hour and commuting back and forth to work and all the other places that you would typically go. Third, you are not paying a lot for gas if you are actually going out there to make some short trips for the essentials. And then lastly, as I just said, you're getting a discount or a refund back from your insurance company because you're not out there getting in trouble, getting in accidents. So a lot of positive things from what would seem like a negative. But hey, we got to hold on to those things when we can, right? Anyway, in our next segment, which we're going to get to shortly after another commercial break, we're going to talk about all the free stuff that you can get right now. There's an awful lot of entertainment and resources available because of the coronavirus. And some of those things perhaps will extend a little beyond the fact of us getting back to work, getting back to school, getting back to our lives. Hopefully they'll extend to that. But for the time being, there's a lot of things that you can take advantage of. And we're going to talk about that after this commercial.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hi, I'm back. And in this last segment, as I said, we're going to talk about what's free. And, there's a little bit of a silver lining, I guess, in all this, that, we're in this together. And that the fact that we have so much available to us virtually, including social media overall, which I think a lot of us take for granted, but it really is a great resource for us in connecting when we can't do it physically and in person. But there are an awful lot of resources for us, and I thought that perhaps we could talk about a few of them here and be able to hold on to your stimulus check to use for other more important things. So if you've been curious about certain streaming companies and whether or not you wanted to sign up, and there's so many, it would be hard to have subscriptions with all of them. A number of them are offering some content free without a subscription. Apple TV, for example, just recently got into that arena, and they are offering their comedy series Dickinson, which is a show inspired by the poet Emily Dickinson, based on that, and another show, a drama For All Mankind. They are offering those two along with some others without a subscription. They also are offering some shows for kids like Ghostwriter, Helpsters, and Snoopy in Space is another one. So those, along with some documentaries and other programming, is now available. Likewise, HBO had announced that a handful of its shows, including Veep, Silicon Valley, Succession, The Sopranos, and Barry, would also be available to stream for free on HBO Go and HBO Now. Those are the apps for HBO. It has also lifted a paywall on several documentary films and series. Showtime, Acorn TV, Sundance Now, Shudder, UMC, and other services have extended free trial periods for 30 days. Now, in a similar vein, Sony is now going to be offering some games for free for PlayStation. Also, there are a number of games that are available for PC, and some are actually available on PS4, Xbox, and even the Switch platform. Those games are Assassin's Creed 2, Close to the Sun, Crime and Punishments, Fortnite Battle Royale, Apex Legends, Call of Duty Warzone, League of Legends, Star Wars The Old Republic, and there are 27 other free games available from GOG. And in addition to the streaming services I mentioned earlier, which are all, of course, subscription programs normally, there are already a number of video streaming services that are free. And that list includes Crackle, IMDb TV, Hoopla, Internet Archive, Canopy with a K, Plex, Pluto TV, the Roku channel, Tubi TV, and Vudu. Vudu being VUDU. You've probably seen these if you have a smart TV, and you've seen some of these programs being available. So there's a lot to check out there. In addition, Amazon has actually made a library of kids' TV shows for free. So that's something to check out. Also, if you're a Comcast customer, if you have Xfinity X1 or you're a Flex customer, there are a lot of new free programming options. They are making on-demand programming from more than 24 entertainment networks and subscription services available for free. What you need to do is to go to your options and say free into your Xfinity Voice remote. The new content draws from Afro, Aspire TV, Black News Channel, Filipino On Demand, CBeebies, and actually there's a whole bunch more, including Showtime, Epix, and other ones that I've never heard of before, but perhaps you have. But nonetheless, check it out. It is free. So also, you have access to a lot of free ebooks and magazines. Libraries often have digital apps where you can go and you can virtually check out either programs or books or magazines. And that's something that, is definitely worthwhile, especially, magazines and newspapers that you'd otherwise have to get a subscription for. Perhaps you're not big on TV and movies and you would prefer listening to music. Well, there are a lot of free options for that as well. Sirius XM, which is, of course, a subscription-based program, is offering its programs free until May 15th. At that point, it will automatically renew at a regular rate of $8 a month. But up until that point, at least it's free. So if you remember to cancel by then, you should be okay. Spotify, Pandora, Podcasts for iPhone, Google Podcasts for Android, and Amazon Music HD, which is also a subscription program, but it has a free 90-day trial period. Those are also available. Also, you have audiobooks. And Audible has made a selection of Audible originals free for the listening. And there are a number of those that if you go to the Audible website, you can see what's available for free. Now, switching focus a little bit from entertainment to communication and perhaps work, there are a number of video conferencing tools that are available. By now, you probably have at least one of them already on your computer or on your smartphone. But it's worth mentioning that there are other alternatives. Everyone's heard of Zoom. It's been the big one that everyone's been talking about lately, just because it's sort of emerged on the scene out of nowhere and has really taken off. But there are those things that have been in existence for quite a while, like FaceTime if you have an iPhone, WhatsApp, which really anybody could take advantage of, Skype, Marco Polo, Facebook Messenger, Zoom, as I mentioned, and Google Hangouts Meet. So again, those are all free platforms to use. Now, speaking of platforms to use and non-entertainment related, if you have been trying to occupy your time learning something new, or maybe even giving your kids other things to work on besides what they have been assigned, there are a number of sites that can be used for free. Scholastic Learn at Home, Khan Academy, PBS Kids, Age of Learning, Prodigy Math, and Mystery Science are some of those programs. Again, free. And if TV, movies, music, books, learning, if those aren't your thing, perhaps you might like to take a virtual trip to a museum. Google's Art and Culture Collections offers hundreds of tours of museums from around the world that you can look at from your desktop at home. And one last thing that's free that's worth mentioning is that apparently Wendy's has a little deal now that if you go up to the drive-thru and place an order and you do say whether that you want chocolate or vanilla, you will get a free Junior Frosty ice cream cup when you mention that. So they are delicious, so why not treat yourself? Well, that does it for tonight's show. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. It really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we would really appreciate it, and we would love to hear your thoughts back about our programming. Thank you, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.